Hello and welcome from Buenos Aires, Argentina to this episode of Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig, where Nate has conversations with entrepreneurs doing business across borders and the people who support them, with a focus on those that have some connection to Latin America. My name is Josefina Dominguez and I am an editor for LatamList, a proud sponsor of the Crossing Borders podcast. Sign up for our weekly updates on latamlist.com to get a summary of the week's biggest headlines in Latin American tech news. Nate's guest today is Vitor Torres, CEO and founder of Contabilizei, an online accounting service for small and micro businesses in Brazil. They talk about Vitor's transition from being a lieutenant in the Brazilian army to getting into management consultancy and eventually moving to London with his family and starting his career over from scratch. They also discuss how Brazil's tax system works and differs from the US, as well as how he came up with the idea to disrupt Brazil's traditional accounting industry when most accountants were telling him to do otherwise. We hope you enjoyed this conversation with Vitor Torres.
Hey, Vitor, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being willing to do it.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. It's a pleasure to be with you and with the listeners.
Where are you in the world today?
I'm in Curitiba, Brazil, working from home during the COVID scenario that we are all facing in the world.
For the listeners who don't know your city, tell us a little bit about what it's like and where it is in Brazil.
Sure. Curitiba is a capital from the Paraná state, which is 40 minutes by plane out of São Paulo, which is the main city in Brazil. It's not the capital of Brazil, but Curitiba is one of the best capitals to live in. It's a very green city, well organized. Things the public transport here works well. So it's a great city for quality of living. Cost of living here is also 30% cheaper than São Paulo. If you look at the main cost of living. I'm originally from Porto Alegre, which is the last capital in Brazil going south. It's near Argentina. But I like Curitiba much better than Porto Alegre, which is my hometown. I'm passionate about Porto Alegre, but Curitiba now has a place in my heart and my family's hearts as well.
What's the tech ecosystem look like in Curitiba?
It's been evolving. When we started a company back in 2013, we didn't have many tech startups here. We had some startups, but now the ecosystem is pretty evolved. It's not São Paulo, given the population size as well, but it's been good. We have been able to attract talent. Talent has been evolving as well because they work in one startup and then they go to another startup, so they bring experience. So the ecosystem is much better than when we started.
So tell me a little bit about your business. When did you get started and what do you do?
Sure. We started back in 2013 and became operational business in January 2014. So it took us like a year to get our product up and running. And then I can explain why that later. What we do, we are an accounting company for small and micro businesses in Brazil. So what we do, we replace the traditional accountant with a single accountant. So think of us like a single accountant that develop its own technology that enable us to scale across Brazil. So to give you an idea and the listeners a better perspective, here in Brazil, we have more than 50,000 accountants spread out in Brazil. Each one of them has on average around 80 to 100 customers. Contabilizei has surpassed 20,000 active subscribers. So it's a big disruption in an old-fashioned business that has been operating for quite some time. And another point, I think to give a better context is sometimes people from outside Brazil think of us like a software, just like a QuickBooks or a Xero platform, but we are not a software. We are an accounting service. So we do tax filing for our customers. We do tax generation for them. We do the accounting books. And in Brazil, that all these services needs to be done on a monthly basis. So it's not once a year, just like in the US. So it's a monthly basis. And here in Brazil, the SMB owner, he needs to have an accountant. And so it's not optional like in the United States. So here, as soon as you get your, the Brazilian EIN, which is the registration from the Brazilian IRS, you would need to have an accountant attached to your company that will we do the interface between the SMB owner and the Brazilian IRS and other government agencies spread out in across the country.
That was one of the most shocking things to me when I first got to Latin America and I started a business in Chile and then later in Colombia and Mexico, was having to have that accountant attached to your business from day one, and then the monthly tax filings. Talk a little bit about that compliance for, an SME with, 50 employees. What is that burden if they're not using you? What does it look like when they work with an accountant compared to working with a tech-enabled accountant like you?
Sure. One of the things that happens is they tend to, because it's a heavy compliance here, and it's most of the work that an accountant needs to do is manually. So having invested, and we are continuing to invest in the product technology a lot, we were able to not only scale the business to operate nationwide instead of operating in only one city, which all the accountants do here. We also, through the technology, we are able to be a much more cost-effective solution for our customers. They usually, when they switch from the traditional accountant to Contabilizei, they can, save up to 80% in accounting fees on a monthly basis. But also all the service that we provide, we are, the main expert in accounting here in Brazil for SMBs, which gives, more security and trust for our customers that we are doing the best and top-notch service for them to know and to, rest assured that all the compliance elements are being done in a proper way. So they will not see, rest assured that every single thing is done properly against one accountant that operates only in their neighbor or only in the city and doesn't know all the Brazilian legislation. And Brazilian legislation, it's a mess, and even more complex if we're talking about tax, because Brazil is one of the top 10 worst countries in dealing with taxes according to the World Bank. So that there is a report that everyone can check online, which is doingbusiness.org, where you can see any countries, how they're dealing with taxes, how to open a company, the difficulties and the rankings in between these verticals. So from the customer perspective, being short in the answer now is we are much more cost-effective solution for them. They can rest assured all is done properly, and also we have experts to help them on the phone, on the online. And we also give them an online platform, so they can check the status. They can, issue invoices if they want to issue invoices through our platform. That's fine. It's included in the fee as well. So we give them the whole visibility of their accounting, all the visibility on the tax compliance. So it's all there. And if you are working with a traditional accountant, you usually don't get to see all this information. You don't get to see all the transparency that Contabilizei enable us our customers to have.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna go jump into you first for a little bit to hear a little bit about your background, and then we'll go back into the business. You said you're from Porto Alegre, and how did you end up in Curitiba?
Well, I was born in Porto Alegre. I lived there until I was 18 years old. At that time, I joined in the Brazilian Army, and I became an officer there. I was a lieutenant for 3 years. And during my Army times, I met my current wife, and we had a kid really, really early. So I was 20 when my first kid was born. Today, she's 17 years old, turning 18. So I started the family really, really early in my life. So after 3 years in the Army, I started working as a management consultant. So in parallel, I was, getting my bachelor degree in business administration. So I worked for 3 or 4 years in management consultancy. The last 2 years, I worked for Canadian management consultancy here in Brazil. And after that, part of my family is German. So I also got the German passport. And then I had this crazy idea with my wife to go to London, live in London, start our, life from scratch again with a kid in a new country where you don't have any family, anyone to support you. So it was kind of fun, and I like challenges. So I lived there for 3 years. My first 6 months there was, working as a barista to improve my English. And then after that, I was a business analyst for a resort and golf management consultancy, which was founded by Faldo, Nick Faldo. The ones who plays golf might recognize him. He was the captain of the European golf team for quite a while, and he's a well-recognized golf player as well. So what we did there, and they are continually doing, we pick up a piece of land and develop golf courses signed by Nick Faldo. We brought different hotel administration, just like Hilton, Marriott, to develop and manage the hotels. We built villas there. It's like build a new city within countries that it's not well developed, but it's great for tourism. So we did one in Cape Verde. We did one in Anguilla, which is in the Caribbean islands. We did in Scotland. So it was kind of fun for us, for me, and my wife and my kid. My kid got into school in London, so she speaks English fluently with a Londoner accent. So it's kind of fun. But then we decided to come back to Brazil. It's our, family lives here, friends live here, and so we came back 2019. And one of the things that I was sure about it is not to get another employment. So I decided to open my own company, which is an educational company. We provided leadership training for medium to large companies here in South Brazil. And then I got to have a contact with an accountant, because once you set up a business, you need to have an accountant. And then I started to feel the painful process of having an accountant, paying a lot of money, not receiving much value out of it. They don't treat you well. They don't answer correctly. So I had to transfer my accountant, more than 4 times. And I liked a lot technology. I used to, be a little bit of, hacker in a good way, working with Linux, Unix systems back when I was a teenager. But I never got a sense of if I could do a business with technology. I went to the traditional way. And then when I got this problem facing the accountants, at that time in Brazil, 2011, 2012, all major, retailers, banks here, and we have 4 or 5 major retailers banks, which is another dynamic from the United States perspective, which you have like several banks. Here it's concentrated in between 4 or 5 banks, and those guys they had lots of branches spread out in Brazil, and they were kind of giving bringing or developing an internet banking system where instead of you having to go to the branch to pay your bills and collect your checks, you would do that in the internet back in 2011. So I got this idea: if the branches are moving to digital, why can't we bring the accountant to digital as well? So it was really, really crazy. And every accountant that I spoke with, they said to me that it would be impossible to do it because of the, compliance. It's really, really messy here in Brazil. There's all kinds of exceptions and nobody understands. There isn't any book, written by the government where you can play and then you can understand what the government asks you. So it's like you need to learn by doing. So that's one of the reasons the market was protected by this, old accounting firms. And I had this crazy idea, and I want to disrupt this industry that has been operating for several years and several decades in the same time. And I figured out that SMEs in Brazil, they are the economic engine for the country. So small business here in Brazil, they generate 30% of the GDP, and they employ more than 50% of the employers here in Brazil. But they haven't been treated well from the accountant perspective and from the banks as well. So they are doing all these economic advances for the country, but they are suffering a lot. And then for me, it was a huge opportunity to tap into. And then we founded Contabilizei against everyone, and also the customers in the beginning. They said, we're not going to switch to Contabilizei because I like to go and have a coffee with my accountant. And other people said to me, no one will hire an accountant online in a digital format. But we kind of made it through. So today, as I mentioned, we have over 20,000 subscribers. We are the largest accounting firm in Brazil and perhaps in Latam. And we have great investors alongside us. We have Kazakh, which they built Mercado Libre, and they invested in Nubank as well. We have IFC, the World Banks, invested in us as well. We have Point72 from New York. So we have a bunch of investors that believe in the company, and understand that we are solving a real problem here in Brazil. So sorry it took so long to answer your question, but that's an overview of my background.
No, that's an amazing story. And going back to when you were in the military, I think we've had 3 or 4 people, one in the Brazilian Air Force, one in the Korean military, I think one in the US military, that later went on to be on the podcast of doing a startup in LATAM. What were some of the lessons you learned from your time in the military that you use in your startup today?
For sure. And the military service gave me, great foundation to be not only a better person, but a good founder and a good CEO. So one of the things that I learned a lot is to have discipline, which is really, really important if you're running a company and if you're starting a company. The other thing is, the sense of friendship, the sense of you need to help people and you need to learn to be helped as well. So in the military, you are facing difficult challenges, and in the tough times, you get to know who a person really is, and you get to know who you really are. So it's kind of you learn and you develop quite much faster than my colleagues that weren't in the military. So I would say basically leadership, and it transformed to leadership, but with a foundation of discipline and friendship.
And how about lessons learned from going to a foreign country and starting basically from the ground up with a young kid? How did that influence starting a business, and what did you learn?
Yeah, because when you go to a foreign country, and especially with a kid, you need to be able to provide not only for you but for your kid, and you need to find a good home. You need to understand how the country works. You need to understand the cultural, and specifically in London, you have so many cultures there. So it was important to learn to adapt really fast with who you are speaking with, who you are dealing with. So adaptability was one of the main learnings I took out of this experience. Plus, when you go abroad and you don't have any support, it's kind of you are on your own. And I faced the same challenge when I started Contabilizei. I was on my own. None of the accountants would want to help. They didn't believe on me, and even the market didn't believe on me. But you kind of become resilient when you go abroad and you start all over. And I brought this resilience with me, I access that again. So that's one of the two things that I learned: adaptability and resilience.
So you talked a little bit about how the market didn't really think that this was a good idea, and the accountants didn't like it. And you're coming back, and after working in management consulting and other kind of more traditional businesses where you probably have a nice stable salary and things are looking good. How did your friends and family react when you decided to get into your own business, and then also one so complicated like doing online accounting?
Yeah, great question. My wife, she has been a great supporter with my adventures in life, and she has been a great companion to me. So she was, she said, if you feel in your heart that you want to do that, I'm going to support you. Just like when I proposed her to go to London. Friends, it's kind of interesting story because I had one friend, I still have this friend, and back in the day he had an accounting firm. So he was the first one I proposed the idea to become a partner, because you need an accountant in your company in order to provide the service. So I need to find an accountant. So he was the first one. He knew me. He know my capabilities. And that time he didn't believe in the idea. So it was kind of tough for me to have someone really, really that understands me, that knows me, and not believing in the idea. And now when I talk about this story, everyone said, okay, what happened to your friend? Do you talk about Contabilizei with your friend? And I said, no, I don't talk, but he usually asks, and we are doing quite well. So he's kind of, I'm not sure if you're familiar and the listeners are familiar with the Beatles story, the music band. There was actually a fifth element to the band early. So I kind of I put a nickname on him to be the fifth element in the Beatles band from Contabilizei, which I think this fifth element kind of regret of stepping out of the band. And I'm assuming that he also does, but I don't tap this into this subject with him unless he ask about it. So
that's probably good thinking there.
Yeah.
So when you started at the very beginning, you asked your friend to come in as an accountant and start trying to get the business to go. How did you get the first accountant, and did you invest your own money into it? Did you raise money right off the bat? Talk a little bit about building the first kind of like product market fit for the business?
Yes, I think like most of the founders, we developed the business in a bootstrap way. So we broke the bank in order to make that happen. So it took us, as I mentioned earlier, 1 year to get the business up and running, because we were doing, it's not something that you can test whether you are issuing tax or not, because it might occur in penalties and kind of can get drowned up on it. So we need to make sure our beta would be consistent for our customers. So that's the reason it took us 1 year. And at that time, we invested our own money in, and to find an accountant was really, really difficult, because you need to understand the accounting outlook in Brazil, which is people that are really, really good accountants that graduate, they tend to go to one of the big four like KPMG, Deloitte, Price. The other ones tend to go to become an accountant in a large enterprise. And there is, the rest that works with in a small traditional accounting firm. And those traditional accounting firms here in Brazil are led by, old accountants, people that has this accounting firm for decades. And sometimes it's a family business. So most of the accountants here in Brazil, they are, old fashioned. So it was difficult to sell to them the idea and the dream to digitalize their accounting firm in order to hit scalability. So what happened is, I think I was pretty lucky, as most of the founders are, to get an introduction finally after like 5 or 6 attempts to get an introduction with a young accountant that ran an accounting firm for his father. So he has been young, and he was technology friendly, and he got the idea. He believed in the idea. So that helped us to found Contabilizei, but it was really, really tough, really tough.
And what was the inflection point to take it from, okay, I've got my founding team, I've got some of the first clients using it, to, wow, this is a VC investable business and it's starting to scale pretty quickly?
Yeah, what happened is, it took us actually 8 months after starting the project and coding the project before having the first account. And the reason we had that is because I spent 3 months in my friend's accounting firm mapping all the processes. So even though he declined the offer, he allowed me to talk to his employees and to understand what how they perform the task that needs to be done. So I mapped all the process and gave that to my co-founder, which was the CTO of the company. Say, hey, let's build this product, even though we don't have an accountant, but I will find accountant in parallel in the meantime. So that was happening. And the inflection point happened when, after 3 months in the operational side, so after we launched the company in January 2014, we had around 70 clients. So in 3 months, we were able to achieve kind of 90% of portfolio in comparison to a traditional accounting firm. So usually the portfolio that they build between 80 to 100 customers takes several years to develop, and we develop in 3 months. So that kind of struck me to say, hey, we might have a big business in our hands. I always had this idea that Contabilizei is much bigger than myself. It needs to be much bigger than myself, and we need to build something that is for the country, for the benefit of all micro and small business owners. So I started to talk to investors to explain what we were doing, why we were doing, and the traction we were having. So in May 2014, 5 months after opening the business, we got our first angel investments. And then after 2 months, Kazakh, which is one of the main funds here in Latin America, they approached us saying that they liked the industry and they want to talk. So we kind of, we weren't looking for a VC at that time, but Kazakh, I think they look at the long term in the company. We were around 6 to 7 people in the company. Our revenues were really, really low, and we had around 120 customers. So that was how it happened. But the inflection point was that when we hit around 70 customers, and for me, we had a business in our hands.
And how have you seen the Brazilian tech ecosystem continue to evolve from when you first started in 2013, 14 till today?
Yeah, it's evolving quite rapidly in my view. I forgot to mention in my background that I started in 2012, right before Contabilizei. I started a startup accelerator program here. So we were the first I think we were the third acceleration program here in Brazil. And then I got to meet, a bunch of founders, I got a bunch of investors, angel investors. So that back then, 2012, in Brazil, we didn't have a good or a well-established tech ecosystem. But since then, I think we are evolving pretty quickly. And you guys from outside Brazil, you can see the correlation in terms of the number of companies that went IPO in the last 6 to 12 months. It has been increasing quite fast.
If you could go back to when you started your business, knowing everything you know today, what advice would you give yourself?
To invest much more heavily in people, even though we know that that's a big truth, even though we know that we are running a tech company and we need to look at the technology. Sometimes we forget that we need good people or the right people to develop the technology in order to scale the business. So I think we would be in a much better position if since the beginning we could invest more in people having great talents, or if we could pay higher salaries to attract talents to develop the company. So if you are a founder and you are in an early stage in their company, bring more money or make a way to get really, really talented people that they will pay good dividends for the company in terms of structuring, in terms of go-to-market, in terms of how to expand the business. And sometimes when you don't do that, it all comes back to the founder, so you carry a heavy burden on having to do the strategy, having to interview people, having to do a lot of stuff, and sometimes you might be missing some opportunities to grow faster. And you are a human, so alone it's difficult to attract traction or get traction if you are working alone as a single brain in the company.
What are some of the top couple of things that you wished that people outside of your business, say outside of Brazil, knew about either your business or about what it's like operating a business in Brazil? What would people find surprising about what you're doing?
I think, well, coming after my experience in talking with several investors, especially in the United States, most of them doesn't understand Brazil quite well. They don't understand and they don't realize that the country is it's a huge, has a huge potential. We have great entrepreneurs, guys, much better than me, running fantastic business, and it's a country that has a huge potential. So that's one of the things I would wish that everybody outside Brazil would know. From founders, what I wish they would know is running a business here in Brazil, it's a bit more complex than running in United States. So if you want to internationalize your business and come to Brazil, hire people here that really understand things and don't try to do your own. And that's it for people outside. I think that's the main point.
What blogs, podcasts, documentaries, books do you like to recommend to people, whether about business or just life in general?
Well, we got a lot of information from abroad, from United States in particular. So kind of all the main blogs that usually the founders that are listening here, they already listen. But I like a couple of books from Jim Collins. So Good to Great is one of the best books in my opinion. So if you haven't read that, go grab one copy and read it. It's fantastic. We like because we're in a SaaS business, we follow main SaaS companies, blog from those companies as well. I like what Ben Horowitz write also. So he wrote 2 books which I highly recommend. In terms of the personal level, I like a lot spiritual books, just like Eckhart Tolle. So The Power of Now, it's really has been serving as a great impact for me. Also Buddhism, yoga. So for me, it's kind of keep me in balance to run a company that is growing at a fast pace. So I kind of try to balance between what I read in the business side and the personal side. And you need to do both. It's not only business and it's not only personal. So you need to have a balance between what you read.
And what's next for you in the business? How do you see the next year or two going?
Well, I think what we are doing here with Contabilizei, we are helping SMEs to get tax compliance. So we started with the foundation of what is in the mandatory service for the micro and small business. But we know that they have other problems to solve, just like cash flow problems So we are going into the financial services space. We are already, offering a digital bank account for our clients, so they can open and register a company with us, have an accountant with which we provide, but also they can set up a business account so they can process payments, they can receive money, and then we can also help them with cash flow issues, with short-term loans. We can do invoice discounting. So we are heading towards combining tax filing and accounting with financial services.
That's awesome. And it's going to be fun to watch as you build the business in Brazil. It's a really cool story and definitely solving a big problem. So thanks for starting the business and thanks for taking the time to do the podcast.
It's a pleasure. Looking forward to have other appearances in your podcast, Nathan.
Awesome. Yeah. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, and you.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Crossing Borders with our guest, Vitor Torres. And thank you to Angel for helping produce this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share with a friend and give us a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's the best way to share what's going on in Latin America's ecosystem.